What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, March 9th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And yes, the lovely Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. Obviously, the big story happening right now, there's a hostage situation at the Veterans Home of California in Yountville, California. It's on lockdown, and apparently there is a shooter in there dressed in black with body armor with what is being described as an automatic weapon, meaning machine gun, unless somebody made a goof and just assumed that a semi-auto was a machine gun. But so far, amazingly enough, the people who are still inside the building, they're communicating on cell phones and so forth. They can't confirm that anybody's actually been injured yet, but the man has taken 3 hostages, which means this story is probably going to be playing out all over the weekend while they resolve this situation here. Apparently this veterans home is a home for veterans who are struggling with PTSD, and at least for the younger ones from the Iraq wars, trying to reintegrate them back into society. It's a huge facility, 1,000 people live there, and it's now surrounded by police and SWAT and so forth. And interestingly enough, the police, again, didn't go on in with the first reports of an active shooter, supposedly because of this report of an automatic weapon, although the first radio call simply described the weapon as a rifle. So a lot of confusing information. Supposedly the Sheriff's Department is going to have a press conference in about an hour. And I'm sure the gun grabbers are just delighted about this because they weren't really getting a lot of traction with that Parkland school shooting. So now they've got another one to wave around and say, see. But it is interesting. Again, so far they're saying they can't confirm anybody's been injured or killed. Apparently the shots were just fired into the air. So who knows what's going on over there. The only issue I have is that home is filled with experienced combat veterans, people the government trusted with military weapons. Now, if only one of them had a gun, this would be over. It's the gun-free zones that are doing it, that and the prescription psychiatric medication. All right, getting on to the domestic politics here, Martin Armstrong has a somewhat different take on Gary Cohn's resignation. And he's saying this supposed clash between Cohn and Trump on the tariffs, and there was a clash, wasn't really the issue. Is that Trump wanted to start cleaning the White House out of some of these advisors brought in by Jared Kushner. All these people who were formerly Goldman Sachs, they weren't draining the swamp, they were filling it. It's like I said, Trump went to Washington, D.C. to drain the swamp, and instead he started hiring all the alligators and water moccasins for the staff. Well, it looks like maybe that is starting to turn around here. And again, Armstrong is saying the real issue was that Cohn appeared to be serving Goldman Sachs' interests rather than those of the American people. Now, getting on back to James Comey, it now turns out that Comey has been caught in a really big lie. Comey acknowledged he purposefully leaked 4 memos of his conversations with Trump to a friend with the intention they would end up in the media and force the appointment or justify the appointment of a special counsel. Now, an Inspector General report will allegedly cite McCabe for misleading investigators about the press leaks he engineered during the Hillary Clinton email investigation. And basically, George Washington law professor Jonathan Turley is saying Comey and McCabe are in serious legal jeopardy, like go to jail legal jeopardy. And I'm sure that Jeff Sessions will come on out and say, you know, they didn't mean to do wrong, so we're just going to let them slide here. Story out of Investment Watch blog, another example of the suppression of free thought and journalistic news stories. And it's going on about this public relations campaign that the corporate media has launched to try and resell the idea that they are the real news and everybody else is the fake news. And they've produced this promo, and the script directs the anchors to read the scripts exactly as they're written. Local stations are instructed to run the promos as frequently as possible to create maximum reach and frequency. Reach and repetition, that's a common phrase within advertising. And the instructions for the promos even include fashion tips for people to dress in jewel tones and avoid the colors red, blue, and purple so that the CNN presenters will look apolitical, neutral, and nonpartisan, which we know is absolutely ridiculous. CNN is highly partisan. They're very much biased, and their ratings are showing that people are catching on to them. Now, you've been hearing about Fusion GPS, and when they were, before the Judiciary Committee, they came on out and basically identified Republican and Democratic funders of the Trump research. And it basically stopped there. But apparently, it's come on out, there are other sources of funding for this Fusion GPS. And Daniel Jones met with lawyer Adam Waldman and basically said Fusion is a shadow media organization helping the government, funded by a group of Silicon Valley billionaires and George Soros. And apparently this information was presented to the Senate Intelligence Committee all the way back on November 3rd. Now, Soros is, not coincidentally, also the funder of two so-called ethics watchdog non-governmental organizations, Democracy 21 and Crew, who have been attacking Representative Nunes' committee memo. So there's Soros messing about with our world again. We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Down in Texas, it has now come on out that one of the public school districts sent out emails encouraging Democratic teachers and staffers to temporarily re-register as Republican so they could skew the GOP primaries. And then after it was all over, they could go back and re-register as Democrats. So the Democrats are just being Democrats and just messing with the elections rather than dealing with the actual issues and priorities of the country. And the email that went on out basically said that the GOP primary is going to influence our lives a lot more than the Democratic primary. That's kind of a done deal. Remember, it came out in 2016, a lot of Democrats had re-registered Republican to vote in those primaries to vote against Donald Trump. And a lot of people had their party affiliations on their registrations changed for them, somewhere in the computer system, so they couldn't vote in the GOP primary. We have the crookedest election system on earth right now. There's no question about it whatsoever. All right, let's get into the war zones. There's a lot of stuff going on. The Syrian army has gained the upper hand in eastern Ghouta. They're continuing to make tremendous strides there. And we've been reporting on how these East Ghouta U.S.-backed jihadis have been attacking civilians, attempting to leave the area during the 5-hour humanitarian pause that Russia set on up. They started originally with just snipers shooting at people to keep them in their homes. Then they attacked this civilian convoy. The civilians got together and said, let's just leave en masse and, most of us won't get shot. And they attacked that convoy. 3 cars were destroyed. We don't know how many people were injured or killed on that. Notice that the core media has not mentioned any of this. We're having to get this information from foreign sources. Now, Iran is all of a sudden starting to talk tough. Every day when it goes, we see Trump talking about unilaterally pulling out of the P5+1. They're still arm-twisting Europe, trying to get those countries to say, oh, yes, we have to fix the Iran deal to add even more weapons that Iran is not allowed to have to defend itself with from the coming invasion. So Iran basically has come on out saying that it's not going to negotiate over what it's doing in the Middle Eastern region with any countries from the West because they don't have any business being there. Iran is willing to negotiate with Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Syria and even Israel because they're part of that whole region. But they're saying, Great Britain and the United States, you have no business being here, which actually does seem to make some sense until you realize that the United States' goal in the Middle East is hegemonic domination of the oil supply there. We've been talking about all these military drills and how it's making everybody nervous. There's that one that's going on in Israel right now with U.S. forces practicing to defend against an attack by Iran. But apparently, the U.S. Army has started a massive live-fire artillery exercise involving thousands of troops from NATO nations, heavy howitzers, multiple launch rocket systems, and mortars. 3,700 troops from 26 NATO member states, including the U.S., UK, France, and Germany. And they've arrived at the Grafenwohr range in Germany along with these heavy weapons. And they're calling it Exercise Dynamic Front 18, which will last until Sunday. And it has a stated goal of developing the capabilities of U.S. and allied fire units to operate side by side, from identifying targets at a multinational theater-level command to tactical units. In other words, they're rehearsing for a war with Russia. Now, as you know, AIPAC is just finishing up their big week in Washington, D.C., where they stand up on the stage and watch all these American politicians bow and scrape to them. Apparently, Nikki Haley was the hit of the show. More about that a little bit later here. But Tuesday, the ACLU announced that it maintains its opposition to the revisions made in the anti-BDS bill that was presented by the U.S. Congress over a year ago. And basically because that anti-BDS bill includes, well, it's a threat to the First Amendment. And the ACLU is saying if Congress passes that bill, they will take this all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. There should not be an Israel exception to the First Amendment. If there are exceptions to freedom of speech, then it's not free speech, it's permitted speech. And that amounts to dictatorship. Article that we got out of IsraelAndPalestineNews.org pointing out, and I think Michael Herzog was talking about this as well at the end of his show, how Israel and its partisans work to censor the internet. And they're well-funded, well-organized projects to basically flood social media with pro-Israel propaganda while trying to shut down and censor facts Israel dislikes. And the projects are using Israeli soldiers, students, American teenagers, and others. And they've been infiltrating Wikipedia to trying to influence YouTube. Some of them operate out of these so-called Jewish community centers in the U.S., and these kids are being paid. A lot of these pro-Israel students going to college don't have to work a job, like down at the fast food restaurant or anything. They just sit on their computers and push the propaganda. And they have this little computer software called Megaphone. And it pops up a little window on the computers. And whenever anybody in the network sees something that is anti-Israel, that's talking about facts Israel doesn't want to come on out, they'll type it into the window, and it pops up on all the other windows, on all the other computers, and everybody knows it's time to jump on, scream, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater, and just junk up the discussion to make it useless. And again, this is heavily financed, well organized. Now, the other day, somebody pointed out that there was a What Really Happened chat over at a website that specializes in chat rooms and wanted me to link to it. And I said, well, I'll try a test link. But if it gets jumped on by the trolls, I'm disconnecting it because I don't have the time to be monitoring 2 chat rooms along with doing the radio show during the broadcast. And sure enough, as soon as the link went up, somebody was in there posting all kinds of porn and stuff, so I disconnected the button. The other side does love to play dirty, don't they? And it's not working. It's not working. The Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I can imagine that Netanyahu's probably screaming about that. Oh, the Nobel people, they're a bunch of anti-Semites. We're going to have the Americans nuke you for that. Anyway, as I said before, Nikki Haley apparently was the big star of AIPAC, and Netanyahu was out there just paying her all kinds of compliments, and basically said they call her Hurricane Haley because she does a wonderful job to protect Israel. And call me silly, I thought her job was to protect the U.S. I mean, I think she's supposed to be the ambassador from the United States of America. Maybe not. Maybe not. Now, as you know, Kim Jong-un has extended an invitation to Donald Trump to a direct face-to-face meeting to occur sometime before May, either later this month or during April. Trump has agreed. It's all looking very positive. And right now, obviously, North Korea has said, yeah, we're stopping all nuclear testing, and that was the precondition the U.S. Laid on. Actually, the precondition for the U.S. was to start dismantling it. North Korea stopped short of that. They're just not going to work on it anymore. But at this point, it looks like, possibly under the pressure from AIPAC and Netanyahu, the emphasis for the next war has shifted away from North Korea and back to Iran. That's my read on the subject. I don't think North Korea is really off the hook. At some point, the U.S. apparently is seeking to conquer the entire world. And the two big problems with that plan are, of course, Russia and China. Now, we've been talking about the U.S. ability to actually wage a war against a military peer. I mean, the U.S. is really good at going into these little tiny countries that have already been stripped of their weapons of deterrence, that are using these old, outdated, worn-out weapons, and the U.S. looks really butch going on in there and killing a lot of people and slapping them around, except for Yemen, which isn't going all that well for Saudi Arabia and the United States. But the United States Marine Corps Commandant told Congress that recruitment is hard work. And he's saying the problem is that less than 30% of young men and women are qualified to join the military. And he's talking primarily about their physical condition, because that obesity epidemic. And here's where all those food additives come back to become an actual problem for the military. Because as we pointed out, the obesity epidemic, it's not a lifestyle situation. There are chemicals added to manufactured food that make you want to eat more. And that's why we have so many overweight people. And overweight people are not very effective in the military. And we can add this to all the problems with our weapon systems. And speaking on that very topic, over at military.com, they're talking about the F-35, and it's already being deployed into supposedly active duty status, even though significant portions of it are still not complete. And what they're doing is they're putting it out there, and they're going to say, well, we're just going to continue upgrades and improvements while it's out there fighting the wars. And they're saying that basically over and above the actual cost of operating the aircraft and paying for the pilots and the ground crews, that just these upgrades and developments will cost $1 billion per year. And what they're saying they want to do is just make all the increments small and just ongoing, rather than try and do a big push to get the jet fully operational now, which it isn't really. It's got huge amounts of problems there. We've been talking about problems with weapons like the littoral combat ships, the stealth destroyer. And then behind it all, we have to ask, when are the sailors on the USS Ronald Reagan going to see some justice? Remember the Reagan? They went on over there to help with the Fukushima disaster, and they got seriously contaminated. In fact, the USS Ronald Reagan is still slightly radioactive. They're still sailing it. They're still exposing sailors to the radiation. But the sailors who were there for that Fukushima mission, they're sick. Some have died. And they're being ignored. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And if you are able, and folks, I cannot tell you how serious this is right now. We're in a war. with the corporate media, with politicians, with everybody who wants to rule the world with lies. We're trying to get the truth out to you, and we need your help. The only way we're going to get the big money influence out of our nation is for the little money to unite together in the common cause of restoring our republic. This is really serious. We're not kidding. So if you can help, the postal address where you can send a check or money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can call and become a repeat subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 03. Now, I understand that all of you are as stretched financially as we are, as the vast majority of the country is right now. But any amount, any little tiny amount at all, is going to help if it comes from enough of you. If everybody listening to this show sent in just $10, that would have a significant impact on what we're trying to do here. I mean, the first 12 years I ran my website, whatreallyhappened.com, I was able to pay for it all out of my own pocket. And we can't do that with a radio network. We need your help. Now, the fact of the matter is, most of you are probably on cable TV, and that means you are paying to be lied to. All we ask is that you are willing to pay a little bit to be told the truth. That's all we're asking. I don't think we're being completely unreasonable here. Well, down in, or rather over in Napa Valley at Yountville, I think the sheriff's spokesperson just set a new Guinness World Record for the world's shortest news conference because he got up there and said, "We don't have any information at this time." That was it. Up and gone. Why did you call a press conference? Anyway, let's talk about the economy here, because once again, we're seeing a big push to deregulate the banks, which is always the harbinger of disaster for the American people. And next week, the Senate is expected to pass the Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act. I like that last one on the end there. The bill is going to roll back some of the Dodd-Frank's financial regulations, and it widens existing loopholes. Now, Republicans wrote the bill, but it has 12 Democratic co-sponsors, giving it a filibuster-proof majority. Now, the legislation exempts banks with less than $10 billion in assets from the Volcker Rule, which bars commercial banks from speculative trades, and various mortgage requirements allows banks with between 50 and 250 billion in assets to operate with less regulatory scrutiny, and directs the Federal Reserve to tailor regulations to the specific balance sheets of the bigger banks rather than enforcing rules equally across the board. Now, most Democrats don't like the bill, but they don't see it as an enormously consequential rollback of their Wall Street reforms anyway. The whole problem is, yes, Wall Street and the banks have to be regulated. Left to themselves, we've seen all the fraud that came out of like Wells Fargo and Deutsche Bank. We know it was deregulation, the ending of Bretton Woods, that contributed to the 2008 crash. And we know that the conditions right now are conducive to a major crash right now. Taking that leash off those vicious Wall Street animals is just making us all prey to their scams, their frauds. The economy is not good. We've been talking about Toys R Us is in bankruptcy. They just announced they're going to liquidate their U.S. operations. So I don't know exactly when that is going to be, but I would assume that it might be an opportunity to do this year's Christmas shopping for the little ones at a really steeply discounted price, if you have some place to store whatever you're buying. And it's sad to see it go. It's another iconic U.S. retailer. And part of it is the economy, obviously. Part of it is Toys R Us. When they first opened up, they were really a cool place. They had lots of really interesting science toys, clock kits, things like that, stuff for hobbyists. And over the last several years, they really began to focus on just selling items that were branded to certain movies. You go into a Toys R Us today, it's like being in the lobby of a multi-screen cinema. You've got this movie character here and that movie character here, and after a while you just get tired of all that, and you say, I just want a toy that isn't also an advertisement for something. Now, Claire's, which is sort of this upper teeny fashion accessory shop, they're about to file for bankruptcy, and as usual, they're blaming online retail for the problems, but online sales amounts to only 2% of consumer spending. The problem is Americans just don't have any money to buy anything beyond immediate survival. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, welcome back to our show. And we're talking about the economic news. Now, Elon Musk is inviting Trump to basically prod China over auto trade practices. China charges a 25% import duty on cars brought from America, 10 times the 2.5% levy the U.S. puts on China-built vehicles. So this is more of the trade war building, the consequences of Trump's tariffs, just kicking it all off on. And we're going to see a domino effect around the world from this. And it is protectionism. And one of the reasons I'm not thrilled about this is because, unfortunately, foreign-made products are better than those made in the U.S. for the most part. It's certainly in terms of the price that you have to pay for them. And I say that, again, going through my experience with cars. I've had great foreign cars. The few American cars I've had were all disasters. I had a Ford Econoline van that burned up its engine. And yeah, great, you've got a warranty, but I don't want a piece of paper that says we'll take care of you if our cruddy product breaks down. I want to be able to buy a product that I don't have to worry about breaking down all the time. This Hyundai that we just got has a 100,000-mile powertrain warranty on it, which tells me they've built it to last because they don't want to spend money on recalls. It's a loss there. The key to economic prosperity, yes, we have to bring back the factories and the jobs, but we also have to make a push to make better quality products, and we have to start developing new technologies that other countries do not have, like we did during the Apollo Moon program that led to the tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then we have to not foolishly just send those technologies to other countries because it makes a fast buck in the short term. Because now, right now, we're seeing the long-term consequences of that foolish thinking. Now, there's another article that came out over at Conservative Tribune saying that one of the reasons that Trump may have gone with the tariffs, it's going to drive the price of any products using steel or aluminum up. And that means taxes associated with those products will also go up. So it's not just consumer spending that's going to be strained for beer cans, cars, washing machines, and so forth. It's actually going to, there are going to be added taxes onto the products, because when products are subject to taxes and tariffs, it's passed along to the consumer. So the price is going to go on up a lot more than just the amount of the tariffs. Now, as you know, Bitcoin has been going up and down and up and down, and everybody thinks it's wonderful, and I'm still not sure one way or the other. But Bix Weir released a YouTube video basically confirming there has been intentional, manipulated crashes of Bitcoin during the last 3 months. The games they're playing to keep the price of gold down, they're doing it to Bitcoin. And Bix explained that Mt. Gox trustee sold about $500 million worth of Bitcoins between December 2017 to February 2018 to crash the value, which is exactly what happened. So they still want to keep us enslaved to those Federal Reserve notes on which interest must be paid. Another article out of Investment Watch blog, with trade deficits soaring, who will buy U.S. Treasuries? Well, actually, a lot of countries have started dumping their U.S. Treasuries. And what's happening is the Federal Reserve is just creating more money out of thin air to buy up those U.S. Treasuries. And they own a lot of them now. The problem is there's a Treasury bond bubble, and at some point that, too, will burst. Now, over at HSBC, they're warning that the February risk correction may be just the start, that we should expect more trouble on the stock market despite the best efforts of the plunge protection team. The United States United Steelworkers president is out there saying the World Trade Organization is a total disgrace. So again, the trade war has hit for real. It has hit for real. Another story coming on out here, the economy has never recovered. It's an illusion. Wake up. I've been saying that all along. When you look at the retail vacancies, iconic retailers going out of business, the homeless and hungry on the streets, the soaring crime, which is, of course, linked to the declining economy, because people don't just get up one day and say, I think I'll be a criminal. I'm tired of being an accountant. I'm going to go on out and be a criminal. No, people turn to crime to survive. And that is a reality. And this is all global. British retailers are getting hit hard, just like here in the United States. This is spreading to all countries. Credit card usage is slowing. People are maxed out, or they are simply trying to get out of debt before it all comes apart. We're seeing a lot of the same things that we saw before the crash of 2008. Half of U.S. companies are losing money. How can you say there's a recovery? It's starting to look a lot like 1987. Credit's going to be a major problem. The U.S. does not import 90% of its aluminum, only about half. The other comes from recycling. The facts are in, and it shows our economy is in serious, serious trouble. And as usual, we're going to be propagandized about it. Oh, it's great. Look at the stock market. Everything's wonderful. Everything is wonderful. Remember when we ran that story about how there are people working at Google, one of the world's richest corporations, and despite the fact they had full-time jobs, they were still living in their cars because they couldn't afford an apartment. Well, it turns out Google isn't the only place. 10% of Disneyland's employees are actually homeless. Many more have to have food stamps to supplement their meager salary. It's embarrassing. The economy is working really well for those at the very, very top. The GOP tax plan underscored that. We have descended into fascism. All the money is flowing to the top, and the people at the top think that's just fine. Now, here's an interesting story. Over in Belgium, they had this bank which had something like 16 billion euros that were frozen funds from Libya. Remember when that whole thing with Gaddafi was going on down? They sanctioned him, they froze his funds. Well, apparently in the fall of last year, there was an investigation into money laundering, and they sought to basically seize the 16 billion euros, and it turned out most of it had disappeared, and nobody has any idea where it went. This from what is supposed to be a major bank. So somebody got away with a lot of money there. Somebody just sent me, let's see, I just got an email here about Toys R Us. I think Toys R Us is falling victim to the demographic winter. Fewer kids mean fewer toys, hence fewer toy stores. Well, maybe, but there are people like Claire and I, when it comes Christmas, we buy toys for family, we buy toys for the neighbors' kids. We don't spend a lot of money, but at least we're out there. I think it really is because the toys, like everything else, have been cheapened and made decadent. Like I said, you walk into a Toys R Us, everything you look at is an advertisement for some other movie or TV show or something else. It's all branded, tied in. And I think part of that problem is that it stifles the imagination of the kids. The toy comes with what you're supposed to imagine. When I was a kid, Legos were simply the bricks and a few other special parts. Now you go on in and you buy a Lego set that is set up to make just one thing. An X-Wing fighter from Star Wars, or something else from some other movie, or some other famous American car. Where does the kid get to exercise their own imagination? Anyway, let's talk about what's going on with immigration and the refugee crisis. Up in Oakland, their mayor, which is Libby, hang on, I got it in here somewhere, Libby Schaaf, basically came on out saying that Jeff Sessions is distorting reality to promote a racist agenda. Now, Sessions has accused the mayor of needlessly endangering the lives of law enforcement officers to promote this radical open borders agenda. And Schaaf is out there saying, no, it's Sessions who's promoting a racist agenda. Dear Mayor Libby, illegal is not a race. It is a crime. These people are criminals. And it looks like the mayor is losing the public relations battle, because there was a poll and nearly half of American voters favor prosecuting Mayor Libby Schaaf for tipping off illegal aliens to an ICE raid last week, which reportedly allowed criminals with violent and sex-related convictions to evade capture. It's not just the fact that they're illegal immigrants. They were criminals. They were criminal illegal immigrants. Violent crime, rape. And Mayor Schaaf just gave them a warning to let them go away. That's obstruction of justice. She should be arrested and prosecuted. It's a Title VIII violation. Now, we understand that Jeff Sessions is suing the state of California and certain individuals over the sanctuary city policies and wants to have them declared unconstitutional. Because, again, there's nothing in the Constitution that says we have to open our borders. All nations have a legitimate sovereign right to control who comes into the country and who does not. Even in the grand heyday of immigration to the United States, Statue of Liberty, they would see the Statue of Liberty next stop Ellis Island, where their papers would be checked, they would be screened for infectious diseases, and those who had incurable diseases were sent back, those with known criminal records were sent back. Open borders has been a disaster. Well, now Judicial Watch has already been in court challenging San Francisco over its sanctuary policy. So the lawsuits are starting to pile on up. Now this one is really going to get you upset, because it gets me upset. Yahoo News, in a 7,000-word essay earlier this week, hailed a, quote, new generation of anti-gentrification activists, end quote, and goes on to say that these activists have rejected the old peaceful forms of resistance for terroristic threats and violence aimed at frightening off invaders. Now, Defend Boyle Heights is a group of activists, mostly of Mexican descent, who are angry over being displaced by white invaders in their Los Angeles communities. And now they want to resort to violence to keep these American neighborhoods Hispanic. This has already gone way, way too far. Now, Samantha Power, one of the top diplomats in the Obama administration, has joined the chorus of voices blaming Russia for the Italian election outcome. Now, as you know, Italy just had elections, and the Eurosceptic parties cleaned up. The pro-EU parties did not do well at all. It was a shock to Brussels, it was a shock to the corporate media, and because the attitude apparently is that everybody wants to live under a global dictatorship. What's wrong with you people? It will be wonderful. It'll be just like Baltimore, for example, or Chicago or Detroit or Flint, Michigan. It's going to be heaven on earth. So obviously, if the Eurosceptic parties won, it had to be Russian interference. These people are jumping the shark. Russia's not to blame for all the ills in the world. The main reason so many member states of the EU are straining to get out of the EU is that open border policy. It is wrecking their homes. And they don't want that anymore. And they're very angry that those leaders who are tangled up with George Soros' New World Order are not listening to the voters. Well, the voters spoke in Italy. It was not a Russian plot. It was not a Russian interference or hacking. The Italian voters are fed up with the refugees, and they want a government that is going to deal with that issue. Now, as you know, on yesterday's show, we had Wolfgang Halbig, and I got a ton of emails basically having him on the show, praising him for his remarkable work. And following up on that, there was an article over at Touchstone Connect. Florida shootings, questions that must be answered, and if not, why not? This is basically a summation of many of the points that Wolfgang and other people have made. Eyewitness Stacy Lippo was the teacher. She got nicked by a bullet. She was not in shock. I saw a photo of her arm. It was a graze. Basically, that was it. And she saw a man dressed in black, looked like a policeman, with body armor, with a gun she'd never seen before. And he was shooting people. Now, that actually got out on the corporate media during interview. They weren't expecting her to say that. And needless to say, Stacy has not been invited back on any of the shows talking about the Florida shooting. Now, we have confirmed Nicholas Cruz was on heavy psychotropic drug prescriptions. And he looked extremely drugged out when he was arrested and extremely drugged out when he made his appearance in court. And as Wolfgang pointed out yesterday, the Broward County Sheriff will not release any of the school videos. Do you remember when this story first broke? And I said I wasn't sure that Nicholas was the shooter. We had an obvious shill caller into the show saying, oh, no, there's a video. I've seen it. Or I've got a friend who's seen it. And yes, there's absolutely a video of Nicholas Cruz doing the shooting inside the school. And he gave me a URL, and I went on over, and it was basically some corporate media talking heads describing the video but not showing it. Which kind of reminds me when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and the Zapruder film was described to us but never shown until Jim Garrison's trial of Clay Shaw. It's got that kind of a feel to it. Going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Parkland, and we're going down the laundry list of all the reasons why this looks very suspicious. Nicholas Cruz's court government-appointed attorney entered a guilty plea without demanding any forensic evidence to determine whether he was really guilty or not. Wolfgang pointed that out yesterday as well. Supposedly, Nicholas Cruz confessed to the crime. But that's all they've got. They don't have any evidence that he was actually the shooter. They did the same thing to James Earl Ray, the patsy in the Martin Luther King assassination. He got a court-appointed lawyer who said if you plead guilty, you'll be treated with leniency. So James Earl Ray said, okay, on the advice of my attorney, I'm pleading guilty. And the judge gave him life without possibility of parole, at which point James Earl Ray said, I want to change my plea. And the judge said, nope, too late, we got you. The other one that was really odd is the Florida Attorney General has offered to pay the funeral expenses for all the deceased. And there's a question. Are those who accepted that money for the funerals do so under the condition that they may not discuss it or dispute the official story? Why would an attorney general do that? We have the FBI did nothing when they had over 40 specific instances showing that Nicholas Cruz had mental instability. They had numerous occasions to intervene, and they did not. You have that student who said she was actually talking with Cruz at the time the shooting started. So it couldn't have been him. These are questions that all need answering. Now, Gun Owners of America has sent out a warning alert. Dianne Feinstein, who herself conceals carry, I might add, is back pushing for even stricter gun control with Senate Bill 2095 and House Resolution 5087. And these are even worse than the one they tried a year ago. Remember the Clinton-Feinstein bill, or the Feinstein-Sisseline bill, where you had to have 2 cosmetic features to declare a gun an assault rifle. One was like a pistol grip and some other stuff, purely cosmetic. And the new bills only require 1. And their bill also outlaws standard capacity magazines, not the extended standard capacity magazines. They want you to have even smaller magazines. So the police and soldiers can outgun you. That's what this is all about. The Second Amendment is about reserving to the American people military force equal to that the government has in order to keep the government from becoming a dictatorship. And every dictatorship in history has disarmed their population. We'll be right back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and we're going to take some phone calls now. Art from Off the Grid, aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Interesting argument that's come out lately. I kind of find it comical because, here's where we get into evidence that people just simply follow the narrative, don't think for themselves, and they have no idea what they're talking about. We have people now, and I got exposed to this about 2-3 days ago in an article, who are equating, you're familiar with the nationalist movement.
Yes.
And there are people who are now equating nationalism to communism, saying that there's, this is just communism in disguise. And it's, I'm trying to argue to these people, look, you don't get it. This is not communism. Nationalism is simply a movement which is being pushed by those of us, and I include myself in this, who believe in our own sovereign borders and the right to defend those borders against anyone or anything that threatens them and the people that live within. And I don't know, it's like they look at me like, I don't know what, with that, that glazed look, like the deer in the headlights look.
Yes. Like
they don't have a clue what I just said. And I'm trying to figure out, how can I put this in such a way that these people understand that what nationalism really is?
Well, you explain it very clearly. And the idea of equating the debate about national borders and national sovereignty to communism, that's Orwellian. That goes right up there along with war is peace, ignorance is strength, freedom is slavery, warming is cooling.
I don't know, man. It's probably one of the most recent, dumbest arguments I've ever heard. And another thing, just real quick, and then I'll back out and let you go on from there. Have you heard about I'm looking at the article here on Yahoo News, the anti-gentrification movement?
Yeah, we just talked about that.
Okay, I tuned in a little late. I'm trying to understand. I cannot understand for the life of me why someone would be opposed to improving the neighborhood.
Well, see, more than that is a double standard. The open borders idea supposedly is we're all supposed to blend together into one population and hug each other, and yet at the same time you've got Yahoo News is saying it's a great thing that the Hispanics in Los Angeles are now willing to resort to violence to keep white people out of their neighborhoods.
It's crazy.
It is. It's
Anyway,
absolutely insane.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. You have a great one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Curtis in Nevada. Aloha, Curtis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Mike, I just wanted to talk about this North Korean development. I think this could be very significant in a lot of ways, not just an isolated thing about Korea, but in the whole deep state fight. And I'll tell you why. It's because the deep state and China were partners, or have been, and still are partners in this whole global thing. That China owes their existence to the deep state. When I say deep state, I'm talking about, the whole globalist thing from the very beginning. I'm just substituting that term.
I'm not sure I would agree with that. I mean, China has been China for thousands of years, all the way back to Qin. Now, there was the communist revolution takeover that was triggered by the corruption of the Chinese empire that had to do with that British war regarding Britain's right to sell opium to the Chinese people. And that's really wrecked the place. And that's when the communists came on in. Well, now China's moving away from that. I don't think China really is linked to the deep state. They're certainly not on board with the globalist agenda.
Okay, Mike, after World War II, Chiang Kai-shek had effective control of nationalist China. Now, Marshall, who was deep state, once again, deep state, we deliberately withheld arms shipments to Chiang Kai-shek for a long time. And the other elements of the deep state were helping Mao. And we actually sent huge shipments of battle arms without firing pins as part of that whole thing. And within a year, Mao took over. And within a year after that, North Korea was a war. I mean, China has always, I think that there's a consensus about these people saying this, that the North Korea has been a satellite since then of China, and that the deep state
what you're describing,
instigated.
What you're describing is the U.S. government's constant meddling in countries to take down governments they don't like and put up governments that they do like. And if that's your definition of being supported by the deep state, I think you need to look at Iraq as a good example that simply doesn't matter, because the U.S. helped put Saddam Hussein into power in Iraq, and then when he broke off his leash, they took him out.
Right, Mike, you're substituting America and U.S. for the deep state. I mean, the deep state's been doing this all along, and the difference is the presidents in the past have been on board with it, and Trump isn't, or I hope he isn't. That's what I'm saying.
I hope he isn't either, but we know that the CIA has been doing a lot of this regime change stuff since the end of World War II, trying to overthrow governments, including governments that are supposed to be friendly.
Right, the deep state, Mike. And see, here's what I'm saying is now, it's what we're seeing with Red China is that maybe they're rethinking. They're rethinking their whole thing with the deep state, that maybe the deep state is not, maybe they're vulnerable. Maybe they just might be, that they might have to, separate this whole plan that they've had to begin. They never intended to be under the New World Order. They were just going to be a strategic partner.
Well, the way the New World Order is planned, there are no strategic partners because there's no nations. That's what the whole globalist New World Order agenda is. There's no such thing as nations. All of the borders come on down. It's all one human population subject to one government. Russian, Chinese, British, French, Spanish, Australian, everybody.
Eventually, Mike.
Okay.
Right. It's eventually. It's like if you're a crime boss in the city and you want to take out the crime boss on the other side of the city, you align yourself with the crime boss across town. You take him out, and eventually you're going to stab that other crime boss. In other words, eventually, there would have been a showdown. But the whole plan was to take out the U.S., and China was waiting for that. They were kind of premature. You remember with the Bundy standoff, right? Hey, come on, let's get this done type of mentality.
Curtis, okay. I don't agree with you, respectfully. I think that China has no reason to feel any gratitude toward U.S. interference in their country. No nation does. I need to let you go because the phone lines are full, and we're actually running out of lines. We're running out of lines. So, Curtis, thank you. We're going to let you go.
Sure.
Go over to Jerry in Chicago. Aloha, Jerry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, aloha, Mike. I had to weigh in on what Art from Pennsylvania was saying, and I got to be honest with you. I just had a conversation with somebody at a local place 30 minutes ago, and she is a caregiver. Oh, boy. She is a caregiver, and she has 2 daughters that are both nurses and everything else like that. And this person that I was talking to, I turned her on to Extendify. I simply wrote it down on a piece of paper. I said, check this place out, and look into their product, and it's all natural. And she is a firm believer that this pharmaceutical, petrochemical, GMO crap that they're pumping into our body is helping people. And I'm going to be honest with you. She got irate with me.
Yeah, we went through that with a friend that we'd had who was a nurse, and we sort of held her hand through a bad period where her husband had committed suicide. But yeah, when we started talking about the issues with vaccines, she got all defensive, and I think that was probably why she stopped calling us. So anyway, listen, I got to get through these calls and back to the news here. So Jerry, thank you very much. We're going to switch to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, real quick, regarding Nicholas Cruz. First of all, his lawyer, or so-called lawyer, should have asked for a mental health evaluation. That's the first thing you do. And the second thing, why does he have a public defender when this kid has over $800,000 in his trust fund?
Well, the terms of the trust fund may say that he's only allowed to take out so much at one time. He may be on an allowance. A trust fund is not something that you can just go into and say, give me all the money. At least never having had a trust fund, I think that's the way it works. If it's set up so that you're only allowed to take out just a little bit, then he couldn't get a lawyer. But this was just being ramrodded through. They grab the kid, they claim he confessed, they get him into court with this lawyer who says, yeah, he's guilty, end of story. And again, a real lawyer would have said, we're going to plead not guilty, and we're going to look at the forensic evidence. Because just as was the case with Sandy Hook, and just as was the case with the Boston bombings, there is reasonable doubt that the designated patsies were the actual perpetrators.
Well, I would agree with you. But getting back to the trust fund, if he's put in jail for the rest of his life or even get the death penalty, what happens to the trust fund?
I have no idea. It depends on how it's set up. Whoever set up the trust fund, they make up the rules. They may have a rule in there that if something happens to Cruz, it passes to his heirs and assigns, and if he doesn't have any heirs and assigns, then it goes to some other charity.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much here, and we're going to go to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
That was Jim.
That was Jim. My mistake here. We got a long list. Don in the Philippines. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, Mike. Yes, on the deal with the tariffs, Trump with his tariffs. I don't know if it's going to work or not. I hope it works, but it looks like he's embarking on this path. But the time they really should have had tariffs was back in the 80s. There was a guy named Clyde Prestowitz that wrote a couple, 2 or 3 books about. Back then, Japan was the ones that we should have had tariffs on instead of just. That was when we really sold the farm. Was back then. But if it works out, now one thing about economics, I remember this interview I saw one time with Mick Jagger, and they asked him why he dropped out of the London School of Economics. He said because there's too many variables in economics. Well, I think that's true. But on the one other topic, you were talking about the Grafenwehr training area in Germany. That brings back memories. I was a cook there in Grafenwehr in the 80s, and back then we were looking for our scenario was the Russians were going to be rolling over the Fulda Gap. So, that's why we had 1 million tanks in Germany back in those days. And now it's a repeat. What's going on now is a repeat of the Cold War.
Yes, that's exactly it. So that the military-industrial complex can get insanely rich off of the American people. And it's a scam. Everything they were telling us during the first Cold War turned out to be a lie. The Russians weren't really plotting to take over the United States of America. They had enough problems to deal with at home. Your comment about economics, too many variables, reminds me of a statement Harry Truman once said. If you took all the economists in the world and laid them end to end, they'd still point in different directions.
Yeah. Well, that's about it, Mike. I'll let you go get back to your news and everything.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the phone lines. Mark in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good evening or afternoon. Thanks for letting me in. I just wanted to clarify, the gentleman was talking about nationalism. Washington, Adams, Hamilton, they were nationalists. Nationalists mean that the states are subject or slave plantations to the national government.
No, that's a federalist. That's a federalist.
No,
that's a federalist.
A federal system is where the states are independent and free, and the way they were under the Articles of Confederation.
Well, the original United States, the states were considered sovereign entities that had simply banded together in that confederation, and that was the original plan. But you're right. Almost as soon as the country was formed, there was the rise of a federalist movement that wanted to exert more control from the national capital over the nation. But setting that aside, we're still, even if it's all one, it's still one nation with sovereign borders. And the idea of equating the nation's borders to communism was absurd. It's right out of George Orwell.
Well, what I'm trying to point out is a federal system is where the states are independent and their own masters. A national system is where the states are not their own masters.
You've got it backwards.
We're misusing the terms.
No, I think you're the one who's misusing the terms. You need to go back and read the Federalist Papers. Okay?
The Federalists, we've been lied to, Michael, but I agree to disagree.
All right, we agree to disagree. Mark, we're going to let you go here. We're going to close the phone lines because I got a lot of news to get through before the lovely Lady Claire shows up here. We may open them again later in the show, but I need to get back to this stuff. We're still talking about Parkland and the aftermath. We're still getting zero information about this veterans home situation in Napa County here. But once again, we're seeing an article. This is Flyover Press. Police are worthless, and it's reminding us all, under our Constitution and our laws, police officers have no obligation to protect the American citizenry. But at the same time, our politicians, our corporate media, are saying that the American citizenry not be allowed to protect itself. This is absolute madness. And remember, even CNN acknowledged the success story of Kennesaw, Georgia. 6 years ago, the city council passed an ordinance that every single home had to have a firearm in good working order. In fact, it wasn't just buy a gun, it was maintain a firearm. That was the language used, meaning keep it in good working order. And because of that, they've had only one murder in 6 years, and violent crime rate is 2%. And before the town ordinance, they had a lot of problems. Just the awareness that there are guns in the homes will tell the criminals to go someplace else. It's always worked out that way. The people who want to strip you of your guns want to turn you into victims of criminals and the government without resistance. Now, interesting little development coming on out, little YouTube video, we put it up there. Remember Caitlyn Jenner, used to be Bruce Jenner, apparently wants to go back to being Bruce, is having transgender regret. I don't know, maybe they kept those spare parts in a freezer somewhere. But apparently Caitlyn is not enjoying her new life, and she wants to go back to being a guy. Apparently that's actually a very common problem. that people who've gone through this very expensive hormone treatment and sex reassignment surgery, they get on the other side of it and realize it hasn't changed their lives. It didn't make their problems go away. Their problems were coming from other sources. And they want to go back. We had a story, I think it was about a month ago, about a student who did a thesis paper talking about all these transgenders who had regrets and wanted to go back, and was just hushed up. Because part of that globalist agenda is to keep us just terribly confused about everything, including what our gender is. And by the way, for the record, I'm a guy. A little bit of good news. Remember that Navy sailor was charged with espionage and thrown in jail because he took photos on the nuclear submarine that he was serving on in an area where photos were not allowed. And they grabbed him and they said, "You've committed espionage." Didn't give the photos to anybody, just took them. And they threw him in jail. And people were holding it up saying, you know, this stands in contrast to what Hillary did and she got to walk. Trump just pardoned the Navy sailor. Good for you, Donald Trump. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And probably now's a good time to remind all of our listeners, if you're not already aware, daylight savings time starts this coming Sunday. Spring ahead. For those parts of the country that don't do daylight savings time, which is Hawaii and Arizona, and I think Alaska, I'm not sure about that, our show will now be 1 hour earlier in the day. So make sure you get your clock set so you're not late for work on next coming Monday. Apparently, Barack and Michelle Obama are going to be hitting the airwaves for Netflix. They are basically in negotiations with Netflix to develop a series of programming that will provide Barack Obama with a global and unfiltered platform to the public. So at the same time conservative media is being shut down, the liberals are going whole hog to just basically take over the corporate media, even more than they already have. Now, Belgium has started giving out free iodine pills. I think maybe I did mention this yesterday, but just to recap, if you're living in Belgium, you can go to your local drugstore, you get free iodine pills. And it's not out of concern of a nuclear attack, but apparently they're concerned about their nuclear power stations, which are starting to get very, very old. Now, Comcast has been found blocking legitimate sites. They have what is called protected browsing option. And the internet is full of bad things, malware, phishing attacks, nefarious ads. Parents don't want their kids surfing without some kind of control because of online piracy and pornography. So Comcast's Xfinity broadband internet service has this protected browsing. The only problem is a lot of good stuff is getting caught in Xfinity's protected web, like PayPal and gaming website Steam, both of which were recently deemed threats by the Xfinity protected browsing feature. And this highlights two aspects. First of all, the extreme power that ISPs now wield over every site and service online, which is probably going to get worse with the end of net neutrality. Or alternatively, it shows that their automated system is still in need of work. That, like most other American-authored software, it's just put into use with huge amounts of bugs and problems. Remember the disaster of the Obamacare site. Facebook has seen a 24% drop in user time spent. I guess all that filtering of conservative news is coming back to haunt them. People can't find what they're looking for on Facebook. They're going to go someplace else. And they are. Those new startup social media companies, they're doing very, very well. Now, Russian researchers have blown the whistle on yet another National Security Agency hack into our systems. And apparently the NSA is hiding spying software deep within hard drives made by Western Digital, Seagate, Toshiba, and other top manufacturers. Obviously, they have managed to arm twist these manufacturers into allowing this to happen. But apparently the spyware is on the hard drive, and it's out of control. Kaspersky said it found personal computers in 30 countries infected with one or more of these spying programs, with the most infections seen in Iran, followed by Russia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, China, Mali, Syria, Yemen, and Algeria. Well, that target list kind of tells us, yeah, this is the NSA. Targets included government and military institutions, telecommunications companies, banks, energy companies, nuclear researchers, media, and Islamic activists. I'm sure glad I kept my old Commodore VIC-20. I'm very confident there's no spyware in there. Now here comes your daily dose of booga booga, and it's a little alarming. This is starting to come from multiple directions. Dr. Jonathan Quick, chair of the Global Health Council, is warning that a mutant flu virus could strike tomorrow and kill 300 million people. So buy lots and lots of vaccines right now. Actually, when I put this story up, I went on back and I put in a link back to a story about how the CDC reconstructed the Spanish flu virus, which, by the way, was not from Spain to begin with. So why are they reconstructing it? Now, Bill Gates is warning of an epidemic that could kill over 30 million people. And of course, now that he's made all of his money off of computer users, he's got no more use for us, and he'd just like to see a lot of us go away. But I'm all of a sudden seeing a lot of these, oh, there could be a pandemic, could be a pandemic. Kind of makes you wonder what they're planning on doing to get us into conformance with those Georgia Guidestones. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the vaccine debate continues to rage on. Earlier in the week, we were talking about how scientists had started looking at vaccines from the physical approach rather than the biochemical approach, studying very popular vaccines with scanning electron microscopes, and found them loaded with these nanoparticles of inorganic, non-biodegradable, non-biocompactable, whatever that means, particles. There's a lot of contamination in those. And again, we keep hearing all these stories about how people are coming down ill that have had the vaccines. They're not working. And apparently, over in Oklahoma, there's a bill passed through committee heading for a vote that would restore vaccine choice. And needless to say, they're getting all kinds of pressure, lobbying from the big pharmaceutical companies. Oh, no, you've got to force people to take our medication. Story out of Investment Watch blog, basically quoting out of Vaxxed. Now, Vaxxed is a documentary about the problems with vaccines. And they devote a good part of that documentary to Gardasil. And in Vaxxed, Dr. Suzanne Humphreys and Polly Tomey go through the Gardasil inserts to explore just how the safety and efficacy research was done and what the results were. And we have heard in many other cases where the safety research on products is rigged. When Monsanto was testing glyphosate, they cut off their rat tests at 3 months. The French study showed that at 4 months is when the effects started showing. So Merck is getting ready to do another test. They're going to be doing Gardasil 9 HPV vaccine trials on postpartum mothers between the ages of 16 and 26 immediately after having their children in the hospital. I suppose that's better than shooting them up with this Gardasil while they're still pregnant. But apparently, Merck doesn't believe that enough people are being vaccinated for HPV. I mean, they're trying to push it for boys now. They're never going to get cervical cancer. It's all about the money. It's all about the money. Now, there's a little bit of victory down in Australia. There was an effort by the corporate medical interest, their version of the medical industrial complex, to force through a law labeling all natural alternative supplements as being based on pseudoscience. They wanted to have a label on there that would basically say that there's no scientific evidence that this product is effective. And a lot of companies have to go through that here in the United States of America. But the courts basically struck it down and said that, yeah, a lot of these products sold in the health food stores date back hundreds of years and are known to have a positive effect. But the medical industrial complex wants you to be dependent only on their products. Even if they're dangerous, even if they're not working, it's all about the money. And I've talked before about this concept of biological coevolution. When you use something from nature to treat illness or infection, garlic's good for things, all these things, we have co-evolved with those life forms and their biochemistry over millions of years. When these pharmaceutical corporations want to create a patented medicine, they come up with an entirely new molecule, something that has never existed before on this planet. And it may not work well with our biochemistry. And that's why I think we're seeing so many of these problems with these new medications. They want patents, they want market exclusivity, and they're creating chemicals that our biochemistry simply doesn't really know how to work with. So over in New England, they're starting to ask, when will it stop snowing? And they're trying to predict when the snow will be over. Most of it's already over. But it was a very heavy storm. And what is it coming from? The effects of declining solar activity. That's what's given us the monster storms, the European super freeze, the American super freeze. We have set all-time cold weather records this last winter. And the global warming people are still out there trying to sell their snake oil. We're seeing U.S. government agencies like NASA and NOAA get caught fudging the data to push a political agenda. And when science becomes politicized, it's no longer science. It's just another form of propaganda. In the good old days, the rulers could turn to the priests in the church, and the priest would tell the congregation, you need to do what the ruler says because that's what God demands. Well, people don't really fall for that anymore. Religion is in decline. It's sort of been relegated to kind of a traditional ceremonial part of life. And so the rulers have now turned to scientists. They get a scientist in a white lab coat carrying a clipboard. And now the story is, do what the rulers tell you because the science is settled. And they're absolutely right. Humans are warming the planet and snow is a thing of the past. Now, if you live in California, as you're aware, there's a tremendous water shortage. And one of the things they're getting ready to do is to allow treated, recycled water, meaning sewer water, to be added to the reservoirs. Now, the technology to do this is out there. We do it here in Hawaii. The problem is that the recycled water from your drains and everything, that treatment doesn't get everything out of it. They'll get all the brown stuff out of it. They'll make it look clear and drinkable. But there's a growing concern over people in this pharmaceutical happy nation that surplus medicine your body does not metabolize is excreted and goes down those toilets. And that's going to go right through that treatment system. And they're going to start using it. But they're very short of water there. And one of the reasons is the huge population growth, mostly of the illegal immigrants. And it is amazing to see the same liberals who scream that overpopulation is straining our natural resources, trying to cram as many illegal immigrants into the United States as they possibly can. But then, when have liberals ever actually made any sense? Now, as you know, not too long ago, there was a huge earthquake in Papua New Guinea, followed by a large series of aftershocks, a rather unusual series. And locals there are saying it has something to do with ExxonMobil's gas project on the island nation. And apparently, there's now a backlash against the U.S. company's activities that's becoming very difficult to contain. Now, we know here in the United States that fracking wells have started triggering earthquakes in areas that never had them before, like Oklahoma especially. Now, ExxonMobil is saying, well, look, New Guinea gets a lot of earthquakes. This is just another one. There's no linkage, really. There's no linkage whatsoever. Now, do you remember this story a while back called Cheddar Man? And the story was last month. Researchers claimed they'd been able to accurately reconstruct the face of the first Brit based on DNA, and sensationally revealed he had black skin. See, Britain is supposed to be black, not white. Well, geneticist Susan Walsh at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis says, we don't know the skin color. DNA testing is not advanced enough to say for certain. This whole thing about Cheddar Man being black skin was more politics than anything else. Now, New Scientist magazine is lamenting the fact that the Cheddar Man hoax admission has been seized on by those alt-right activists to question whether science is accurate and valid in other areas like, well, you know, human-caused global warming. Or vaccine safety, for that matter here. Medical experts are now changing their mind. They're recommending against routine screening for ovarian cancer because apparently there have been false positives leading to unnecessary life-altering surgery for women. The test is not reliable. It's profitable. But unnecessary surgery, I mean, that's insane here. Now, getting out to outer space, as you know, there's a Chinese space station, the Tiangong-1, and its orbit is decaying. The Chinese space agency has lost control of the craft. It's just up there. It's slowly coming down. It's a replay of Skylab, where they don't really know where it's going to hit. And they're now projecting it will come back to Earth somewhere between March 29th and April 9th. It's carrying a lot of nasty stuff like hydrazine, which is toxic. Although I can imagine that if that tank does rupture on re-entry, the heat of re-entry will decompose the hydrazine very quickly. But it's an 8-ton craft. They lost control of it in 2016. And the orbit is inclined 42.8 degrees to the Earth's equator, which means the orbit reaches as high as 43 degrees north and 43 degrees south, which is a pretty wide range. It's going to come down somewhere. Hopefully it will be the ocean. But basically the orbit is high enough to reach to the very top of the continental United States and reach down to the southern tip of Australia. So pretty much a lot of the world could see this come on down. So grab a bunch of souvenirs and sell them on eBay. I remember when Skylab came on down and NASA assured us that, it crashed in the Pacific off the coast of Australia. And then it turned out parts of it came down on Australia. And some of that stuff is in museums now. But a lot of it wound up being sold on eBay. And I little paperweight, little lucite paperweight with a little flake of Skylab in there. But keep your eyes to the skies, and we're going to be looking at the tracking very, very closely, and hopefully we'll get something a little bit more accurate as to where it's coming down and when. The problem is, of course, if you look at weather maps, you understand that the Earth's atmosphere is not perfectly spherical. It bulges up over the high pressure zones, It's lower in the low pressure zones. And so as the space station encounters the upper edges of the atmosphere, it's hitting these denser pockets. And it's kind of like a ball in a pachinko machine or a pinball machine. You're not exactly sure where it's going to go bouncing. It's a classic chaos theory problem. So we'll keep an eye on that. Now, story coming out of another one from Investment Watch blog. Apparently there is a new legal defense for crime. And it's called "The Air Pollution Made Me Do It." Because researchers are saying air pollution can trigger unethical behaviors, leading people to commit more crimes, to cheat on their spouses. I'm cheating on my spouse because it's a smoggy day? And is there really something there, or is this just another excuse for people to justify cheating on their spouses? I think it's the latter. I really do. I'd be more inclined to think prescription antidepressants are causing people to cheat on their spouses because it gets in the way of impulse control. Now, a new study has come on out from an Indian non-governmental organization saying that there are, in fact, cancer-causing chemicals in toothpaste and soap. And the study said there are alternatives and that all of these chemicals have a severe impact on infants and children. Triclosan is an antifungal agent, and it's used in soaps, toothpaste, deodorants, mouthwash, detergents, and hair products. It has an impact on developmental and reproductive effects and a potential cancer risk, which kind of reminds me about that story that came out a while ago about how sperm counts for men in the developed countries have been in decline. Are we mouthwashing away our fertility? There are parabens in there, also antibacterial. They interfere with endocrine systems. And this one is admitted to interfere with male reproductive functions, may cause breast cancer. Phthalates, used as a plasticizer, added to plastics to improve their flexibility. Tricyclocarbon, say that one 3 times fast, D-ethanolamine. And corporations put this stuff in their products because it makes the product look better and more attractive and people will buy it. And unless somebody makes a real stink about it, they don't really care if it's actually potentially harmful. We went through that with all of these formaldehyde precursors that were really affecting Claire. And yes, they did pass a law saying that formaldehyde glues were banned for use in baby shoes, but it's still used in other leather products, and it is a known carcinogen. Now, there's a new theory about autism coming from research scientist Stephanie Senoff, in which she says that we need to look at glyphosate exposure. And she's saying that by the year 2025, unless something dramatic changes, unless the real cause of autism is identified and dealt with, 50% of children born in the United States by the year 2025 will be autistic. And that will be enough to crush our economy. The cost of caring for all those autistic children, there won't be anything else left over. And Dr. Senoff is maintaining that the skyrocketing autism rates are linked with the growth in use of glyphosate. Now, this doesn't necessarily get mercury off the hook. We know that autism is damage to the brain, and it may be coming from multiple sources. Tap water in Illinois is polluted with high levels of nitrate from the GMO corn belt. Our water is very bad in this country. The bottled water companies love that, but it's not good for us, what's coming out of the tap. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with another segment, and then the Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about science, health, and medicine. Apparently, Martin Shkreli, remember the guy who bought rights to a drug and then price gouged it, was caught with some other things. He's been sentenced to 7 years in prison, so that's a real good one. I want to step back to the immigration issue because Nancy Pelosi just came on out and commented on the Department of Justice lawsuit that seeks to declare unconstitutional the concept of sanctuary cities. And Nancy Pelosi's comment was, we'll keep the doors open for illegals to make America more American. I think we need to drug test this lady right now when she says things like that. Now, as you know, we've got this opioid crisis in the United States, and we're not talking about what you find down there on the street corners. We're talking about prescription opioids. There's a huge supply of cheap heroin coming in from Afghanistan. Under the Taliban, Afghanistan stopped the opium crop. Ever since the Americans went on in, the poppies are blooming. They got bumper crops. Those opium poppies are being guarded and protected by uniformed members of the coalition. We have a whole bunch of photos. U.S. soldiers with the flag on their shoulder guarding the poppies. And so doctors were initially encouraged to prescribe these things, to turn people into addicts, to be another revenue stream for the medical industrial complex. Now we're seeing the result of it. Emergency rooms are slammed with opioid overdoses in Missouri and Illinois. Let's see here. All right, I'll tell you what. We're going to go ahead and take one phone call before the top of the hour. Dave in Missouri, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Mike. Hope you're doing well today, brother.
Doing fine.
First question.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. First question is Carlos Rivero, the famous terrorist, going to be with you in the third hour?
No, that's my wife.
I would love to hear Lady Claire.
Yeah,
I would love to hear Lady Claire respond to that. That's the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard. And when you told us that the other day, it was just so ludicrous that it was hilarious. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I mean, so I hope she'll address that in her own classy, articulate way. We'd appreciate hearing it. And you covered so much tragic news. The opiate thing, the poppies, the CIA drilling. I mean, we remember Arkansas. I'm from Arkansas. I mean, we both lived through that period. It's more of the same. It just never stops. And autocracy that you talk about. And it's just, rather than a real economy. And you talked about the autism level of children. I mean, how heartbreaking. But Mike, what I really called about was North Korea. Because to me, that an American president would meet with such a despotic thug as that third-generation communist dictator is an insult. And really, what does he have to offer us? What does he have, for that matter, to offer South Korea, except that he's no longer going to be pointing guns at them? He's got an $8 billion
wait a minute.
South Korea has a 14
I have to cut you off because we're almost out of time in this segment. First of all, what you think you know of North Korea has been fed to you by the same corporate media that told you Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. Okay?
Okay, but do you not see it as kind of an East Berlin, West Berlin thing where the two sides are...
Okay, we got to let you go. I'm sorry. There's the music. I got to let you go. We're going to close the phone lines again. And when we come on back from this break, the Lady Claire will be here. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, third hour. And the phone lines are closed right now. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to join us on Fridays with her unique perspective on the world. So what do you want to start with here?
I'd like to start with some interesting developments in the Philippines. The UN has called for a psychiatric evaluation after Duterte puts top human rights expert on his hit list of alleged terrorists. Now, the gal's name is Victoria Tawi Corpuz, and she is the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Human Rights. And Duterte put her on a list of 600 people who have allegedly used acts of terror to undermine the president. And the list labels those on it either communist or New People's Armies, etc., etc., etc. Well, I would suggest to the UN, you follow the money. And this is what this gal did to get her into deep kimchi, all right? She was included after she reported on the displacement and killings of the Philippines' indigenous Lumad people at the hands of Duterte's armed forces, allegedly due to unfounded suspicions that the Lumads are involved with militant groups, or, and here's the money shot, folks, in view of their resistance to mining activities on their ancestral lands. Now, I didn't get exactly who is doing the mining, but Mike, I am sure that President Duterte probably is getting a large cut of this
I'm sure
somehow.
He's getting a large cut of the action here.
Yeah.
And frankly, if the United Nations is going to start giving world leaders psychiatric evaluations,
Yes.
I've got a very, very long list of world leaders who ought to be in that same clinic with Duterte.
Yeah, yeah.
Including Obama
Yes.
and Bill Clinton.
And Hillary.
And Hillary.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, let's go over to some problems we're having here in the U.S. Apparently, there have been toxic chemicals found in drinking waters of 2 Detroit suburbs. And the contamination, and I'm going to take a moment to try to read these names because they are not native to my speaking of
English.
English.
Well, let me help you. Perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl.
Thank you.
Yeah.
PFAS or PFCs, a suite of chemicals used in thousands of applications, industrial, food, and textiles. Now,
but we're sure that they're in safe levels.
Yes.
It's safe levels.
Right. And the new Baltimore Mayor, John Dupre, said in a statement today, I will be attending a meeting with MDEQ early next week to discuss this issue in great detail. You're safe. Folks who live in this area where this has been found, find out for yourself. Mike, isn't there a water testing kit that we have used?
Well, there's a water testing kit,
Yeah.
but it's not going to detect these chemicals.
Ah, okay.
That's the problem with that.
Oh dear. Then where should people go to get their water tested?
Well, there are commercial water labs where you can send it. What was really interesting, I noticed in the documentation there, they said, we're not issuing a boil advisory. Well, boiling the water wouldn't do anything with these chemicals. A boil advisory is in the case of biological contamination, germs or virus.
Yeah.
And so it's completely inappropriate for them to even talk about that. But I think they said that to give you that false sense of security.
Yeah.
But the issue is that, yes, if you drink one glass of that water, these chemicals are probably in presence in such small amounts it won't hurt you. But if you're drinking that same water day after day after day, week after week, month after month, eventually there's going to be a cumulative effect.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So please don't believe anything the local officials tell you. Go out and check for yourself if you live in these areas. Now, another article that I thought was kind of interesting was titled, and again, this is from Blacklisted News. If you haven't wandered on over there, you might want to think about it. Terrified of losing in court, ISPs, with Senator John Kennedy's help, are pushing hard for a fake net neutrality law. And now, by law, the FCC has to prove that the broadband market changed substantially enough to warrant such a severe reverse of popular policy. And the numerous lawsuits headed the FCC's direction by about 25% to 50% of the states will also take aim at all of the shady and bizarre behaviors by the FCC during its ham-fisted repeal, making up a DDoS attack to try to downplay the John Oliver effect to blocking a law enforcement investigation and rampant fraud that occurred during the public comment period.
I remember that. They
man.
were filtering those public comments.
Oh, hello.
The overwhelming number of comments were in favor of net neutrality. Those were simply taken out.
Yeah.
And the FCC had their hearings only looking at the comments that said, yes, we need to end net neutrality.
Right.
This is a big stink and a big fight.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, Washington State just passed a net neutrality law of their own, saying that if an ISP wants to operate in Washington State, they have to comply with the concept of net neutrality. So basically, it looks to me like what's going on is the FCC is afraid they're not going to be able to withstand all of these lawsuits.
Yeah.
That they could easily lose them. And so let's talk a little bit about what is the law. They're trying to come up with a new law that looks like net neutrality but isn't.
Yes. And if if I can go back down here a little bit.
Okay.
Last fall, AT&T's favorite, Masha Blackburn, introduced a bill like this called the Open Internet Preservation Act. And while the bill's stated purpose was to reach a compromise and put the net neutrality debate to bed, its real intent is really far more wicked than that. While the bill would ban behaviors ISPs had no real interest in, like the outright blocking of websites, it had a number of loopholes that allowed anti-competitive behavior across a wide variety of fronts, from zero rating tactics that exempt an ISP's own content from usage caps to interconnection shenanigans or anti-competitive paid prioritization. And basically, it's a net neutrality law in name only, underwritten by the broadband industry. I mean, come on, how much more obvious could they make it?
Well, we're seeing basically an attack on the open internet on all fronts. They want to relegate traffic to a side road, slow down our speeds.
Yeah.
We're seeing that, in point of fact, ISPs are now actively blocking websites.
Yep.
And shutting down debate. There literally is a war going on. Here we go.
Okay. All
I'm
right.
going to ask by the control room to take your volume down just a little bit.
Oh, okay. Another article I found very interesting and disturbing, the Parkland shooting. 2 Florida SWAT team members have been suspended after responding to the Florida massacre without their boss's permission. And they were identified by the Florida Sun Sentinel. Jeffrey Gilbert and Carl Schlosser did not tell their superiors that they were going to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where the alleged mass shooter, Nicholas Cruz, killed 17 people. They jumped into action because that's what they do. They were trying to help the police at the scene get a handle on what was going on. These 2 gentlemen, in my eyes, are heroes.
I agree.
And to have suspended them? Holy crud. You know.
We know that the cops were literally, the deputy sheriffs were literally being ordered not to go into the building. And I noticed in this incident up in Napa County at the Veterans Home, the same thing happened. All kinds of police cars. The police are walking around outside. In fact, they're rather casual about it. Apparently not concerned about being shot at from a window. And they were, again, ordered to stay outside because supposedly the suspect there has an automatic weapon.
Okay.
But that's, what the police are supposed to do, the SWAT teams are supposed to do.
Yeah.
Is get on in and deal with it. That's what they're paid to do.
They heard the radio call, and they went down to try to help, which is what, and there are still folks, even though we hear a lot about police brutality, there are some very good cops out there. Please remember that. And I think that these people were suspended is just criminal.
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And let's bop over to dear old Amazon, which apparently is partnering with British police in a way that is alarming privacy advocates. Now, this is happening in Lancashire. It's northwest England, and they have rolled out a program to broadcast crime updates, photos of wanted missing people, and safety notification to Amazon Echo owners. And since February, there has been a free app to those using Alexa, which is a cloud-based voice assistant hooked up to the Echo Smart speaker. The first of its kind in the UK, it was developed by the police force's innovations manager in partnership with Amazon developers.
Another reason I'm glad we don't have one of those things in this house.
I would never have one of those things in my house, And now what's happening is Amazon's role as an intermediary has increased. Lancashire County will store citizens' crime reports on the servers rather than those operated by police. Hello? This is, Mike, this is a little frightening.
It is a little bit frightening because Amazon has had issues with its cloud servers.
Yeah.
Amazon is trying to become all things to all people.
Yeah.
And those Echo speakers and Alexa.
Yeah.
They're listening to you all the time.
Yeah.
There was that story we had the other day where for some reason there's a bug in the system where it will just start laughing at random
creepily.
intervals.
Yes. Oh, that can't be very comforting to those people having that and using that. But apparently the next thing they're going to do, expected to be launched by the end of this year, will allow users to report crimes directly to their smart speakers. And after that, it's imagined that Alexa might be used not just by civilians, but internally for officers' briefings and important information. And this gets a little bit scary out there.
Actually, I gotta be honest with you. I kind of like that last one.
Okay.
It's faster than using 999.
Yes.
And certainly automating the investigative powers of the police. That would be legitimate.
Okay.
I mean, I use Dragon Speech here sometimes on this computer to find files and so forth.
Yeah.
It really is handy. So I have to say that I don't have a problem with that last part.
Yeah.
It's the part where it's intruding into your home.
Yes.
And spying on you.
Yeah.
And I certainly, if there's a real emergency to us, we get it on our smartphones, like that incoming ballistic missile we were all warned about a while back.
Yes.
I don't need my smart speaker to be telling me about crimes that are happening well away from my home.
Yeah. And then let's go on to Mueller and his witch hunt. Apparently now, George Nader, a cooperating witness in the Mueller probe, was arrested for child porn in the 80s.
Well, my goodness, no wonder he was willing to become a cooperating witness.
Yeah. And so he's now cooperating into the investigation of collusion between Donald Trump's presidential campaign and Russia.
Oh, no, the investigation has changed.
Lord.
It's now collusion between Donald Trump and this porn actress.
Yes.
Whatever her name is.
Yeah. And apparently this guy was a frequent visitor to the Trump White House last year. And a New York Times story last weekend said that Mueller was looking into whether Nader, wait for it, a Lebanese American with access to Persian Gulf elites, had helped funnel foreign money toward Trump's campaign. Now, come on. We're not talking about Russia here whatsoever. We're talking about other countries that might have benefited from a Trump presidency.
Okay,
now,
but again, the letter of the law is candidates in this country are not allowed to accept money from foreign interests.
Right.
They do it all the time. The Clintons certainly did.
Oh, Lord, yes.
The Chinagate scandal in 1996, they used Chinese American citizens as cutouts to make it all look like it was legal.
Yeah.
And of course, more recently, the payoffs were made as donations to the Clinton Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
So again, if Trump was being given foreign money through this guy, okay, that is a tacky no-no.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that this guy received a package that included both a film of young boys in intimate behavior and pictures depicting boys without clothing. And they conducted a search based on a warrant. Similar material was found in a room that Nader was renting. However, the evidence discovered in the home was ruled as inadmissible because the warrant was challenged, but the material delivered in the original package was not ruled inadmissible at the time, and the charges were dismissed.
That's very interesting. Just
Very
ahead of the jury
odd.
trial,
Yes.
the charges were dismissed.
Yeah.
Which means Nader is on the hook to
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
somewhere.
Oh, he owes big time.
Yeah,
He owes big
that's a
time.
chip in the great game.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you mentioned that Toys R Us is liquidating as early as next week. And so was a place that I was fond of. It's called Claire's.
Yes.
And where thousands of young girls went to get their ears pierced for free because they were selling the earrings to, to go with the pierced ears. It's really sad because those are landmark mall stores and they're going to be gone,
So
and
many,
it's
so
sad.
many iconic stores. Now, Claire's relatively recent, but Toys R Us, I mean, they've been around forever. And we're seeing all these iconic retailers in serious trouble. And again, they love to blame it on online sales. Oh, it's that Amazon effect. But as much as Amazon is doing, online sales still only account for a few percent of consumer spending. The problem is consumers don't have money. Everybody is struggling just to pay their mortgage, their rent, put food on the table. We're starting to see tremendous food inflation out here in Hawaii.
Oh, man.
And it's getting to be a tremendous problem.
Yeah.
So we don't have money to go on down and buy things from Claire's or Toys R Us anymore. It's just not there anymore.
I mean, Mike and I occasionally will frequent a big box store, and normally we can get some pretty good deals there on some things, but he and I looked at the final price, and boy, he had to help me out a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't planned that what we got, and I swear to you guys, there was no caviar in the cart at the time.
Yeah.
No filet mignon.
That's what Claire said when we were checking out at Sam's Club. She was looking at the final bill and said, "Where's the caviar we bought?" And the cashier cracked up.
Yeah, but it's really getting bad out here. I do not know how families who want to serve their families healthy meals are able to do it unless they're real whizzes at slow cooking and know how to make every drop count.
Well, everybody's learning how to do that. We've got a slow cooker so we can get the cheaper cuts of meat, and it's really a bit of a struggle. And one of the things that has been a problem for us is the flea market at the bottom of the hill that used to be a drive-in movie theater. It's not a flea market anymore. It's an overflow lot for all the island's car dealerships, and that means that the farmers markets that used to be there are not there anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, but we can now drive further to get to those farmers markets with the Hyundai.
Yes.
Which is in somewhat better condition than the Honda was.
I would say a great deal better.
I still miss the Honda. I love that car.
I know you did. He gets attached
we were growing old together.
All of us. But we realized now that we have the Hyundai, how much the Honda had caused us to be housebound because Mike was really concerned about getting it over the hill to get back into town in Honolulu.
Yeah.
And, we can actually go places now. And,
we can go over to the other side of the island now, and we can go into Honolulu now. And I'm actually, realizing that my very timid style of driving around with the Honda, I'm having to relearn, how to blend in with traffic.
Yes.
Sort of get my freeway driving chops back.
Yeah, because we haven't been doing it for a while. If we wanted to go somewhere, sometimes we take a cab.
Yes.
Absolutely. And that
we'd rent a car.
Yeah.
If we had people coming in to visit us from the mainland, we'd rent a car. Both for the safety and because the Honda really was looking grubby. All right, we got to take a break now for commercials. We'll be back with more of the Lady Claire after these few words. Aloha, America. Well, Claire, I need this for
I'm
a second.
Okay.
Okay, and there we are. Welcome back to the show here, and Claire and I are playing dueling mouse on this system here.
Yes.
And that roar that you hear out the window are these military transport planes taking off from down at the bottom of the hill.
Yep.
So, what is your next story?
At AIPAC, Democrats try to outdo Trump in their devotion to Israel's oppression of Palestinians. Now, there is a journalist I'd love to meet, and his name is David Cleon, and he went on and on and on about Chucky Schumer's speech at AIPAC, and this is a no. Let's hear how you really feel, David, about Schumer's speech. He characterized it as bigoted, divisive, embarrassing, as is the while you were busy sucking up to AIPAC, New Yorkers deserved better representation. Because the last time I checked, senators were supposed to be responsible to the people who elected them, right?
Well,
not to a foreign government.
That's the way it's supposed to work here. I love that comment that Schumer made, that the reason there was never going to be peace between Israel and Palestine is the Palestinians don't believe in the Torah.
Hello. It's an absolute insanity. And a lot of it can be laid straight at Israel's feet with U.S. enabling.
Yes.
This oppression of the Palestinian people is horrific and terrible. I mean, they're imprisoning children who don't speak Hebrew, they speak Arabic. and getting them to sign confessions on the older members of families who are not obedient to the Israeli rule. And this,
what Israel has done is basically turned Gaza Strip into a ghetto. Mm-hmm. They're doing to the Palestinians exactly what the Nazis did, or in Poland, in the Warsaw Ghetto.
Yeah, and it breaks my heart. And I will say this very honestly: I want to see a thriving Israel continue, and I also want to see a thriving Palestine be given a chance to survive. I really do. Although, unfortunately, the way that these settlements have been engineered by Tel Aviv means that there is not a possibility right now for a continuous Palestinian entity to exist because of all contiguous. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it was engineered that way.
Yeah,
the settlements are all illegal, but I'd like to see everybody prosperous and happy, the same as Claire.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the attitude of too many of our world leaders is it's not enough that we succeed; everybody else must fail.
Yikes.
And that certainly seems to be the attitude of the United States government against Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Niger, and wherever else they're located right now.
And wherever else they have the resources that we're expropriating. And getting on with this, the Jerusalem Post is reporting that Operation Juniper Cobra, which is a joint air defense exercise with U.S. and IDF forces, has started, and we will have simulated battles on 3 fronts, and that kind of clarifies who and what is involved in the joint exercise.
Well, it's already come on out that the main focus of this exercise is how they will respond to an attack by Iran.
Right. Which means we can expect a false flag any second now.
Well, there was that Pentagon guy out there saying, there's somebody out there. They're going to set off a low-yield nuclear weapon in the U.S. because they think they can get away with it.
Oh.
No, nobody thinks they can get away with it.
It would be insanity.
It would be insanity. Yeah. If there's a low-yield nuclear explosion in the United States, the United States government did it.
Yeah.
Or Israel did it.
Yeah.
Or they both did it.
And apparently, this operation is going to be targeting both Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon, which Israel's been making stink face at and wants to invade, and the Gaza Strip, because there's a threat of high trajectory missiles. Well, hello. What we're expecting is a false flag from either Israel or the United States to kick this off. And I really do not want to see our military involved or used by Israel in this manner whatsoever. Because,
you can't expect Israel to use their own children to fight a war. Those Israeli children are precious. The Americans, that's why they're here.
That's the problem.
They're going to be the bullet catchers.
Yeah, I do not want to see our American troops being used as sacrificial lambs.
Yes.
In Israel's regional grab for hegemony. If anyone has ever taken a look and Googled the term Eretz Israel, you will see that bits and pieces of other countries have to come off in order for that to remain, in order for that to happen. And many of our troops are going to be there through the end of March. Guys, it's only the 9th. There's a lot of time before something could happen.
Okay, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and we'll be back with more of the Lady Claire after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we get back to the Lady Claire, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Just listen to you and Claire. Claire sounds so much better. It's good to hear. But Hey, listen, I was calling to chime in on the Israel thing, and I wanted to make a point that I didn't have time to make yesterday, and that is that Ahet Tamimi, that 16-year-old Palestinian girl who her cousin was shot in the face, and an hour later, Israeli soldiers came on her property, and she actually resisted to the point where she slapped one of them and armed with an assault rifle several Israeli soldiers. And they've imprisoned her for, what she's under military tribunal, what's going to be years. And the point I want to make, Mike, is that given the power to do so, if they will brook no opposition whatsoever, that even if you symbolically, this girl's not a threat to anybody. She's a 16-year-old girl who slapped somebody and had good reason to do so. But they're calling for her rape in prison and all that kind of thing. And even ministers of justice have said things like that, how she should be beaten and raped in jail. At any rate, given the opportunity, they would do that to anybody. Culturally, it is it's a completely rapacious and insatiably rapacious culture. But the one other thing I want to also, the similarity is that the Germans, Hitler was never elected. But, and all those atrocities took place in Poland or the occupied area under total censorship.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Hitler did win the election to Chancellor of Germany.
No. Actually, he was second, and it was brought into the government by Hindenburg. Okay. And when Hindenburg died, he ascended then. But he never won the election. He never won a majority. But the policies of apartheid and thuggish, brutality. The Israelis have voted for that for 70 years, Mike, and not only have they done so, but the conscript army, it's in sight of their whole society. Their children, their parents, their grandfathers all participated in it. The women have participated in it. The newspaper there's no censorship there. They're out there reporting on it, and they keep doing it. It's a sick culture. That's my point.
I'm not defending Israel, and frankly, this young lady, it's gone viral around the world. They're even putting up billboards that are equating her imprisonment to that of Nelson Mandela. But technically, had it happened here in the United States, she'd be guilty of assault and battery. Assault is when you take a swing at somebody. Battery is when you actually connect. And yes, it's just a slap. But I think the reason Israel has done this to her is they're trying to set an example. Make an example of her to send a message that, yes, when we come into your home and we shoot your family members and we knock over the walls and everything, you can't even fight back with as much as a slap, or bad things will happen to you. It's government by terror. And yes, Israel is treating the Palestinians the way we are told the Nazis treated the Jews. And Poland as well. Now, I would tell you that in my opinion, because of the multi-generational mass participation and the election and re-election of all this and reaffirmation of these policies for generations, it's worse than the Nazis. Well, you're making the assumption that Israel's elections are somehow more honest than those in the United States of America, and I think that's a dangerous assumption.
Well, what that may be a dangerous assumption, Michael, but what is not an assumption is that there's mass participation on this. That their conscript army, which is co-educational, for generations has done that and participated in these atrocities, and they keep going on.
Well, look at the atrocities being committed by the U.S. armed forces in all these other countries. Look at Abu Ghraib. Yes, I agree. Israel is behaving very, very badly. But I think we really ought to be cleaning our own house out first before we try and reascend the throne as the moral human rights guide to the rest of the world. We're a world that's basically gone to war. And again, troops do bad things when they're ordered to do bad things. They shouldn't, but they do. And what the problem isn't the people of Israel or even the conscripts. It's that small group of civilian leaders who think this is the direction that Israel, or for that matter, the United States, ought to be going. And as we saw at last week's AIPAC, Israel is dictating much of what the U.S. is doing in foreign countries.
Well, that's my point. That's another point, Michael, is that would we be doing this if we're not being used as their cat's paw? And maybe we wouldn't be. Maybe the whole history of the last 30 years or so would be different. Had the neocons and the APAC and all that not controlled our foreign policy, maybe we wouldn't be where we're. Maybe it's the toxic, it's the toxic influence of the Israelis.
It's subversion is the word that you're looking for. It certainly goes back further than 30 years. Even Harry Truman was complaining about undue Jewish influence in the affairs of the U.S. government. And when he signed that letter recognizing the new state of Israel, it was basically in response to a tremendous amount of arm twisting and lobbying by Jewish groups in the United States of America. And even so, he did make a change because the original letter referred to Israel as the Jewish state, and he struck that out and he just replaced it with the nation of Israel because he realized that declaring a state based on a religion was a giant step backward for human civilization.
Mike, I read something just over the last 2 days, and maybe I sent it to you, maybe I didn't, but Dave, some historian has uncovered the fact that J.P. Morgan was buying up in 1915 and 16 20 or 25 newspapers to take control of their editorial policy to get us into war.
Yes.
And when he died in 22 or 23, and this is a fact, it became, when his estate was settled, and he was like the richest man in the United States at the time, or one of them. It was found that he only controlled 25% of his empire, and the rest of that was the Rothschilds.
Yes.
So even back in World War I, the 25 papers or whatever that were bought up to get us into that war was done by basically a Jewish lobby.
Well, there were other interests as well. Remember, no war or assassination is ever done for just one reason or one group. When you have a large assortment of special interests that all have their own agendas, and all of those agendas are solvable by the same war or assassination, that's when they're going to happen. So certainly Israel and the Jewish lobby is a part of it, but there are definitely other players that are involved in all of this stuff. Great Britain wanted to crush Germany because Germany was an economic threat to Great Britain. The Germans have always been very clever about factories and machinery, and they were out there selling products that Britain couldn't match. And so that was Britain's motive for wanting to have a war with Germany. When World War I broke out, it was supposed to be a war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia following the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. But everybody saw an opportunity to say, hey, this is our chance to take down Germany, and that's why the war mutated away, and all of a sudden Germany was the bad guy. And my grandfather, the one who used to get drunk with Nixon, served in that war. He was hit with mustard gas. He lost a lung. He won the Croix de Guerre, but he wouldn't say what he did to get it. Same thing in World War II. When the Nazis kicked out the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles, their economy exploded. It was called the German miracle, and they began building their factories and starting to make products that Britain couldn't compete with. And Winston Churchill actually went on the radio before World War II and said, if Germany is allowed to start selling products all over Europe, then obviously World War I was fought in vain. So again, it all comes down to money, territory, and control. And there are a number of players, and they're all equally guilty. And it's not appropriate to try and just say it's just AIPAC, or it's just Israel, or it's just this. We know that the U.S. economy...
I'm not saying it, Mike.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounded like you were going there.
Well, but I will say that the bankers, the Rothschilds, J.P. Morgan, that's a major influence. I would tell you, I think it's a decisive influence. Just as I think the neocons and AIPAC is a major, and the banks now are a major and decisive reason why we're in all these wars. And Israel, of course. But at any rate, that's all I'm saying. It's not the only reason. Of course, you're right.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it would happen without that.
It's interesting to debate whether it would have happened or not. I think actually it would have, at least from the point of view of the United States of America, because every time they get the economy into a total mess, they get into a world war. maybe not to solve it, but to at least have something to blame the economic crashes on and the economic hardships on. And that's certainly been a factor here. If you remember General Wesley Clark, he blew the whistle on the U.S. agenda in the Middle East. It was all about controlling the oil and controlling what currency that oil was traded in, because all of these countries were starting to break away from the petrodollar deal in the awareness that the United States could no longer protect them from the aggressions of Israel. And so it was purely economic on the part of the United States, as well as the agenda to contain Russia, which the U.S. now thinks is interfering with their right to dominate the world.
That central bank thing again, Mike.
Yes.
But, well, listen, thanks very much, guy. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and we're going to get back to the lady Claire. So, Claire, take it away.
Well, there has been a very interesting development in London. Armed men have raided the Iranian embassy in London. And early reports say that 4 guys forced their way into the embassy while threatening people on the scene with machetes and baseball bats.
That does it. 15-day waiting period for baseball bats.
Amen to that, brother.
Okay.
And the London police have reportedly deployed around the embassy, but have taken no action. And this gets stranger and stranger, Mike. The slogans chanted by the raiders indicate that they are members of the Sadiq Shirazi Shiite extremist sect supported by London.
This is another goad at Iran.
Oh, yeah, and come on. What are they digging for, and how did they get into the embassy? Is it so badly guarded? Man,
Well,
if I had an embassy in a foreign capital and this was allowed to happen, I mean, I'd move it. I'd say, we can't be here. We can't be safe.
maybe that's what the agenda is here.
Yeah.
You know, London supports these people.
Yeah,
London
yeah.
probably paid for the machetes and baseball bats.
Yeah, but that sounds so weird. It sounds like an inside job. MI5, MI6.
Well, could certainly be that. And again, the goal may be to try and provoke Iran, or to get Iran to close its embassy, because we know that once Syria is pacified, Iran is next on the list.
Yes, on the to-do list. Now, the British government is duty-bound to seriously and decisively fulfill its responsibility to protect the Islamic Republic of Iran's diplomats and diplomatic centers, and immediately arrest and prosecute those who have trespassed the diplomatic sanctuary, a spokesman said.
Well, I would have a question.
Hello.
And this has to do with the way embassies are constituted.
Yeah.
Technically, the grounds of the Iranian embassy represent sovereign Iranian territory, where the London police would have no jurisdiction unless the Iranian ambassador said, we need you to come in here, which I assume probably happened.
Yeah, I would imagine. But the timing of this just smells to high heaven.
It does indeed.
Yeah, and I think it's a precursor to what may be coming, especially after the meetings between Netanyahu and President Trump.
I think Netanyahu told Trump, forget about North Korea, put it on the back burner. Your job is to get Iran for us.
Yeah. And in another political tit-for-tat situation, the RNC chair has called on DNC chair to address the party's ties to America's leading anti-Semite, Louis Farrakhan. Mike, what do you think of this?
Well, again, they're digging at each other.
Yeah.
Putin is right. Our political system is eating itself.
Yeah.
And I know the Jewish Republican coalition in Congress is calling on 9 Democratic congresspeople to resign. Because they've associated with Louis Farrakhan.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with Louis Farrakhan. It has to do with trying to negate the Democrats' potential gains in Congress this November.
It's a political game of gotcha.
Yes. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And you know how everyone yesterday, when the announcement was made that Kim Jong-un and President Trump were going to meet before May?
Yes.
There's a headline in Zero Hedge, again, a very sober blog that I like. Not so fast. White House says North Korea must take concrete actions before Trump-Kim meeting.
Now, when they first announced the meeting
Yeah.
before May, there were supposed to be no conditions,
Yeah.
and apparently somebody has come on out, and they've basically thrown a monkey wrench into the gears
Yeah.
by saying that North Korea has to do concrete actions, which means they're back to saying North Korea has to dispose of its nuclear weapons first.
That's not going to happen,
No,
Mike.
it's not going to happen. We're back to square one on this whole situation. This is a negotiating tactic
Yeah.
that our government has unfortunately caught from its long association with Israel, because Israel always approaches a negotiation saying, you give us what we want first, then we'll sit down and talk, and maybe we'll do something nice for you. And that's always been their attitude. Now, Kim Jong-un has, in fact, already said all research and testing and development of nuclear weapons has come to a halt. They're just going to lock the doors and walk away. But what obviously the United States wants is for those weapons to be destroyed so that when North Korea is invaded, they can't really fight back.
Yeah. And there has been an interesting development on the dodgy dossier against President Trump. Apparently, this poisoned Russian spy is linked to Christopher Steele, the guy who wrote it. And this guy was poisoned along with his daughter in Salisbury, as well as 21 other people.
Now, that right there tells us it's not Russia.
No.
Because they're very pro. They're experts at making deaths look like accidents.
Yeah.
Or if they're going to target somebody with a message, they just target that one person.
Yeah.
This is too sloppy to be Russian work. We'll be
I
right
agree.
back after these few commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Final segment of our show on this Pauhana Friday. And Claire, take it away.
Yeah, something I think we need to be paying attention to. During a congressional hearing on Wednesday, U.S. military leaders publicly took Russian President Vladimir Putin to the woodshed, verbally only, for unveiling 6 powerful new weapons during his annual address to lawmakers, including what is believed to be a modified Iskander ballistic missile capable of defeating U.S. and NATO anti-ballistic missile systems. Now, Mike, you have an explanation for this about what makes these missiles the Russians have far superior to what we've got. Could you share that?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that they simply modified an Iskander.
Okay.
Because the description of that particular weapon is out of the flight regime of the normal Iskander. I think it's something completely new.
Okay.
But basically, they've devised weapons that are very much faster than our anti-ballistic missile systems are able to deal with.
Yeah.
They're maneuverable, they're intelligent, they've got long range, and they're able to basically circle around and flank our current defenses. But I understand that the military-industrial complex is going to seize on this development to scream, we must have more money.
More money.
You know,
Yep.
we don't need all those schools and roads and hospitals and anything.
Yeah.
We need the money. But I think Putin was sending a different message. He wasn't trying to provoke anything. He was trying to reinforce the idea that nuclear war is unthinkable.
Yeah.
So the U.S. should stop thinking about it, because he's probably heard all this talk about people in Washington who just want to uncork a nuclear attack on Russia, you know, and get it over with. Paul Craig Roberts was saying that his sources inside the Beltway were saying, yeah there's all this crazy talk in there about, like, you know, to heck with it all. Let's just go ahead and launch all the missiles and get it over with.
You know, it seems to me, Michael, that there was a time, maybe I'm just being naive, but there was a time when the United States was capable on a diplomatic level of pursuing what it wanted, its geopolitical agendas, through honorable, hard-won negotiations rather than war. But right now, the military policy that I'm seeing, it's like a kid with a hammer who thinks everything's a nail and must be nailed down.
Well, that's coming from the military-industrial complex, because they hate times of peace.
Yeah.
In times of peace, there's no money, there's no promotion. They just sit there waiting for something to happen. When a war comes along, the money pours on in, promotions pour on in. And yes, when you create this military-industrial complex that has a need for there to be war, they will make sure that war is going to happen. And that's a big problem. And Eisenhower did warn us about this.
He nailed
in his
it.
farewell address. He
Yeah.
warned us about the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
And he said it is a danger to American institutions. And his warning has turned out to have been quite accurate.
Yeah, because there's, I mean, even with the huge amounts of money that is being spent by the U.S. government, there is really only so much. And if it's going to war and weapons of war, it's not going to the infrastructure. It's not fixing the problems that we have right here at home.
It certainly isn't. We're in a wartime economy. They don't want to admit it, but we have been for several years. There's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here. Have yourselves a really good weekend. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Meanwhile, please continue to take what you learn here and the What Really Happened website and forward it to all your friends. Use mailing lists, anything that you can. We're being censored on social media, so I wouldn't bother with that.
Nope.
But just keep getting it on out there. Keep talking with all of your friends. Have a good weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.